Gates to Infinity is by far the worst Pokémon Mystery Dungeon game. How does that statement make you feel? Are you mere millimeters away from your keyboard right now, ready to defend this game in an attempt to invalidate my opinion? What if I said Gates to Infinity is one of the best in the series? Would you start complaining about the small selection of Pokémon to choose from? Or maybe that you can't accept multiple missions at the same time? Perhaps you could bring up statistical data. Gates to Infinity is one of the least sold Pokémon Mystery Dungeon games after all, but does that actually prove that it's the worst game in the series? Of course, just because we have different opinions on this game doesn't mean either of us is right or wrong. For some reason, we tend to see those with differing opinions as the opposition. The points I made before were a few things people disliked about this game, and if my first Pokémon Mystery Dungeon game was something other than Gates to Infinity, I probably would have felt the same way. The internet is a toxic place, and it truly shows the character of humans. We're so quick to point out every flaw and critique every aspect as if we suddenly become experts on the topic. The theme of hope and despair present in Gates to Infinity sheds light on the dark side of life, and though this game does have its flaws, as does literally everything in this world, the irony is that there are negative reviews for a perfectly functional game that basically says, stop being negative. With the Nintendo 3DS eShop closing very soon on March 27th, I want to point out some of the critiques people have made about this game and why I think you shouldn't let them discourage you from buying Gates to Infinity. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity was released in North America on March 24th, 2013, and its gameplay follows that of its predecessors. For those new to the franchise, Mystery Dungeon is a series of roguelike role-playing video games where combat is turn-based, movement is grid-based, and levels are procedurally generated, meaning that an algorithm decides how the level is constructed. The Mystery Dungeon games were made by Spike Chunsoft, the same company that also developed the murder mystery Danganronpa games. The Danganronpa franchise focuses on the theme of hope and despair, and this theme is also present in Gates to Infinity. This explains the approach to giving various side characters a deeper background, and characters' initial distrust towards society sparked from events that occurred in their past. For example, the carpenter that promised to build your house scammed you out of your money because in the past, someone made him suffer by destroying his hard work merely for their entertainment. Another character, Virizion, who is very popular among the residents of Post Town, rejects Dunsparce's friendship because in the past, her best friend basically ghosted her and said they shouldn't be friends anymore, explaining Virizion's distrust towards the friendly residents of Post Town. In Gates to Infinity, not only are you traversing through dungeons, you're also exploring the growth of these side characters, which is quite the opposite in previous games where only your partner Pokemon has some sort of development. The carpenter that scammed you learns that not everyone is a jerk that feeds on the suffering of others, and Virizion learns how to trust and eventually decides to join your team. As the player, you are the spark of hope that saves the world from negativity and despair. I find that some of the complaints regarding Gates to Infinity are merely rejections to innovative ideas that were eventually polished in Super Mystery Dungeon. In previous Pokémon Mystery Dungeon games, a personality test determined which Pokémon you would play as. However, players might not have been content with the result and would opt to put dishonest answers instead to get the Pokémon they want. Gates to Infinity sought to get rid of that by removing the test altogether, but people were dissatisfied with the loss of the iconic test that added charm to the series. The game also wanted to promote the Generation 5 Pokémon, so character selection was restricted to only have the Generation 5 starters, Pikachu, and Axew. This upset many as they felt the selection was very limited. When Super Mystery Dungeon came around, not only did they bring back the large roster of Pokemon and the personality test, they also included the option to choose the Pokemon for yourself if you didn't like what was presented to you. You could say that Gates to Infinity was an attempt to break the mold of older Pokémon Mystery Dungeon games. There was one more complaint that many people had, and it was that you were limited to doing one mission at a time. In other Pokémon Mystery Dungeon games, you were allowed to take on multiple missions at once, so if all the missions you chose were located in the same dungeon, you could effectively complete all of those missions at the same time. This was a very efficient way to get more resources, items, and money. Gates to Infinity introduced an area outside of the main town called Paradise, where you can make customizations to fit how you want to play, like changing around party members or remembering and forgetting moves. One of the more interesting parts of Paradise is that unlike in the rescue team games where areas around your home can be expanded to house inactive members of your team, areas instead expand to build facilities. These facilities, ranging from dojos to berry fields, require materials to build them, and these materials are acquired when you complete missions on the request board. The contradiction is that on one hand, the game wants you to gather many materials acquired by missions to construct facilities for Paradise, but on the other hand, the game doesn't want you to take on multiple missions at once. It would have been nice to be able to receive multiple missions at once, but here's why I think they brought the limit down to one. The idea of Paradise is that it's slowly being constructed as you're completing several dungeons. Taking on more than one mission at a time would disrupt the natural progression of Paradise. Also, it would provide the player with way too many items in a short span of time, making the game a bit too easy and the companion mode almost pointless. The companion mode is such a great mechanic in Gates to Infinity. As you get to the later parts of the game, story dungeons become much longer and resources start to run very thin. The companion mode is a way for the player to take a quick breather from those longer areas. You're able to control one of the recruited Pokemon you have back in Paradise and form a team separate from your main party. This newly formed party will be able to accept and go on missions from the request board like you normally would, thus granting you items such as orange berries and reviver seeds that you can then deposit in the magical chest for your main party to access in the middle of their long venture. It can feel pretty discouraging to lose, especially if you were a few floors away from completing the dungeon, but at that last rest stop, you ran out of items to withdraw from the chest. Regardless of whether or not you get stuck in a story dungeon, the companion mode makes it possible for the player to continue playing the game. Although I never use this feature myself, I find it's a great mechanic that younger or newer players can utilize if they ever find themselves in a tough situation. The game does have its flaws, but also Gates to Infinity made a lot of gameplay improvements from previous titles and added features that set this game apart from its predecessors. If you're looking to get into the Mystery Dungeon franchise, I think Gates to Infinity is a great game to start with. However, I do think the theme of this game may be a bit too mature for young audiences to comprehend. Playing this game now feels a lot different than playing this game 10 years ago. If it's been a few years since you've last completed Gates to Infinity, I think you should revisit this game one more time. Gates to Infinity has a special place in my heart. It was one of the games I lost when I had to sell my video game collection, but I was recently able to put this one back on my shelf. It's a very underrated game and definitely worth picking up before the Nintendo 3DS eShop closes. Eventually, I will add all the games I lost back into my collection so that I can make more videos like this one. If you guys enjoyed today's video, be sure to hit that like button because your support is greatly appreciated. Let me know down in the comments what you think about Gates to Infinity, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.